What's up, Deadheads? It's Brian Castrillo. It's time to talk about The Walking Dead Dead City, Episode 3, titled People Are a Resource. Now, of course, spoilers are coming. In 3, 2, 1, you've been warned. Now, I love the title that this is, People Are a Resource. I think it's fantastic. Of course, it brings me back to when Negan was with the Saviors. But we start this episode with a flashback with Negan and Ginny. You remember her from episode 1. She was the young girl that Negan took in, and she, could not talk because of past trauma. Well, we learned a little bit as to why they became closer. And essentially, they're running from a threat, or she was out there looking after this threat was there. And she's looking for basically a stuffed dinosaur. Now, Negan is also yelling at her, telling her, you need to learn to talk to me. You need to yell. You're going to learn this because if you're not there, I can't help you if I don't know where to find you. But he ultimately ends up telling her a story about him and Lucille. You remember his former wife, and how he used to have this whistle to her. So when she couldn't talk, at least she could whistle possibly and let him know when, she needed him. And they end up finding that dinosaur. He patches it up and kind of a cute moment where he wraps it up like he was doing surgery. And he tells her that if you do this whistle that my wife did, I will come find you. And she hugged him because this is a moment where she realized that she could trust him. Now, this is where we start off modern day, where she's leaving Maggie's camp and she's heading off to the water to essentially go to Manhattan. And this was a really weird scene. For a series that has great cinematography, this was really strange to me. She gets in a cooler and she's paddling across the water to Manhattan. It just looked really strange. Then we got another scene where they're hunting a deer, and that just brought me back to that bad CGI deer. We all know the one. And this one was a lot better, but it still looked a little bit wonky. But it leads into a conversation where we learn about the backstory of Manhattan, how they bombed the bridges, and how this group that we've met were essentially there as kids, and somehow they learned to survive in this craziness, which I couldn't even imagine that, because a city is going to have thousands of walkers. So the fact that they made it this long, starting from kids, is amazing. But then we get to see Madison Square Garden, which blew my mind, because it's essentially covered with green. The earth has taken it back, and it just absolutely amazing job on the special effects and cinematography in the series. And this was a big scene that really showcases what they can do. But then we see this turkey float, basically one of those things from the Macy's Day Parade, is going down the street, making noise, attracting these walkers, or as they're called, fleshies in this episode, where they eventually bring it around to the entrance of the Madison Square Garden. And we see they have the marshal locked up, where the Croat welcomes them, and we learn that he's actually harvesting the dead and putting them in these water tank and creating methane gas, which is gross but kind of genius, because he was actually a scientist in a former life. But then then we learn that Tommaso was actually in this group within the Madison Square Garden, but somehow he learned how to escape, and he's helping them basically develop a plan to get back into Madison Square Garden so they can try and find Herschel. But someone in their group, this really big, brawny guy, does not trust Negan, and you can see the glances back and forth with Negan. He even mentions how he believes that Herschel is dead, and he just doesn't trust him at all. Eventually, him and Negan come to blows. He has the wanted Negan poster, and he's just saying, you got to go, we're going to fight. Ultimately, Negan ends up killing him, but first he scratches his face with a cheese grater, and he ends up falling on this pipe and kills him. Real wild scene. But there's a moment in Negan's face where it just brings him back, I think, to when he was essentially doing what he did as a savior. Now, we see Croat and the marshal. They're in one of the suites of Madison Square Garden. He's got the marshal handcuffed to the rail. He's got one of his bodyguard people watching over as he has these fancy meal prepared for him and the marshal. He tells him, basically, I can provide, safety for you. Just tell me who you're with, why you're here, and just join us, and I can give you everything you need. Sound familiar, just like Negan. Of course, the marshal's not buying it. And then the Croat, after having this discussion with him, sees a worm in his meal, and he gets upset, and he basically blames it on the guard that's with him, and he forces him, after showing the marshal the key to his handcuffs, and he forces him to eat it, and then he beats him up and throws him over the rail. So, you know, that guy's done. And essentially showing, you know, that he means business. And after that, we see a scene. This was a really heartwarming scene. Maggie opens this box. She has Glenn's watch that he got from her dad. And we see pictures of her dad, Herschel, back on the farm. There's a drawing of Glenn. And this was just bringing back a lot of emotions. And this is a moment that her and Negan, this is one of the best scenes, I think, of the series so far, because Jeffrey Dean Morgan and Lauren Cohan did a phenomenal job in this moment. And this is where they're starting to, you know, really become closer, because he talks about how his wife Annie, and I guess their son name is Joshua, how she was beaten and robbed, and I think he insinuated something else, but essentially he has her go on this train to Missouri, and he just doesn't go with them, and he hopes that they're safe, and so I'm assuming we'll eventually get to them and find out what's going on there. But then we see the Croat, and he's giving a speech to his people around this octagon ring inside Madison Square Garden, and he uses the phrase, "People are a resource." They're going crazy for him. Now, I don't know if that means that the Croat initiated that, or he's learned that from Negan, that specific speech, but they clearly have learned from each other. And I know we're not supposed to talk about Fight Club, that's the first rule, but we're going to talk about what happens next, because they bring in the marshal and they tie him to what looks like a pole in the middle, but before that they make him breathe in methane, so he cannot really see. He's essentially kind of drunk from the gas. And in comes that walker, the one that swallowed the key. Of course, they're called fleshies now. And he ends up fighting him. He grabs him with the handcuff chain, and, you know, boop, and he has to dig out the key out of that fleshy, while the Croat is watching him, and he does something with his boots, and the Croat's watching him beat up these other fleshies that come in, and he learns that there's something in his boot, which brings up the next scene where he basically has his people force him to give him that, and he reads it to the marshal, the Croat does, and this is breaking him down, and he eventually tells him that he's there looking for Negan. And in that same scene, we also learn the backstory of the Croat and why he is the person he is, that essentially his wife and his two daughters were eaten by another family. Of course, that's immediately bringing up Terminus memories. I don't know if there's any relation to that, but that's just essentially what I thought of. And then at the end, well, before that, there was a scene where that dinosaur, Ginny dropped it when she's in Manhattan now, and she dropped it to run away from this fleshy, but the scavenger picked it up, and she's part of that whole group. And this scavenger is portrayed by, I hope I say this right, Aixa Kendrick, and she gave that dinosaur to Maggie. Now, Aixa Kendrick, if I'm saying that right, she is going to be interviewed by Katie Harden from Lorette Magazine. Go find them on Instagram and Twitter, Lorette Magazine, Lorette Magazine, because on the Instagram, it says that on July 2nd, they're going to be releasing part 1 of an interview. So that's going to be really cool to learn, you know, what she thought of, you know, during her filming on the set. But then at the end, we see Maggie, she puts the dinosaur in, and also Ginny's in the background watching. She's about to burn it and light it up, and you can see she's holding back. She's doing this basically because she wants to make sure that Negan is fully on her team, and she's doing what she needs and not tell her about Ginny. But then there's this creepy ass song playing by Dave Van Ronk. It's called Hang Me, Oh Hang Me. When you look at the lyrics of this and think about everything that Maggie's been through, and Negan, and throughout, you know, the whole universe, it really rings, it just really creepy. But you can hear it playing right now. But yeah, what did you guys think? I loved it. Let's talk about it.